We're back. Several folks have been asking about Bobby and how his health is, and we got the Mayo Clinic and got the number one pancreas doctor in the nation. And he said the blood test that showed indications there might be autoimmune disease, he said, we're the ones who invented that test. We're the ones that invented that test. We're the ones who know how to interpret it and teach it to the rest of the world. Let me assure you, he does not have autoimmune disease in the pancreas. And then in the liver, he said it's 0.01 chance, but they will still do an MRI with the contrast and 3D, and looked at that, and that was all fine. So there wasn't any issue with that. But they did say it's kind of 50-50 whether someone so young should have their gallbladder out if it's not causing too much trouble. So we're kind of weighing that, but a couple of doctors that we've talked to is saying, take it out. You should take it out. Don't risk the serious issues that can develop, later on, or anyway. And it really hadn't completely cleared up, so we'll look to summertime, hopefully, to maybe do that. But anyway, in the meantime, we made some good connections and got lots of good information about the whole GI tract and how to be healthy and so forth. So hopefully things will go well. But the big thing is all the scary things are not there. So that's the good part. So now to kind of catch ourselves up to where we were, we've had Joseph, and he got sold off into slavery and went down to Egypt and did well for himself with some ups and downs, and now he's the second in command of the whole nation and has gone through the process of the 7 years of abundance and plenty. And now, in chapter 43, verse 1, now the famine was severe in the land. And when they had eaten up the grain that they had brought from Egypt, the brothers had gone down, and the land was still in famine. And when they had eaten up the grain they had bought from Egypt, their father said to them, go again, buy us a little more food. But Judah said to him, the man solemnly warned us, saying, you shall not see my face unless you bring your brother with you, your brother Benjamin. If you will send our brother with us, Judah tells Jacob or Israel, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down, for the man said to us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. Now, the see my face means you will get no audience with me. And if you have no audience with me, then there's no negotiating for grain. And so, anyway, so Israel, Jacob said, why did you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother? And they replied, the man questioned us carefully about ourselves and our kindred, saying, is your father still alive, and have you another brother? What we told him was in answer to these questions. Could we in any way know that he would say, bring your brother down? Then Judah said to his father Israel, send the boy with me, and let us be on our way, so that we may live and not die, you and we, and also our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. You can hold me accountable for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. Now remember, Reuben offered, you can kill my children if I don't bring him back, when we had the other version when they first got back. But anyway, if he had not delayed, we would not have returned, or we would have returned twice. So he's kind of angry with Judah. You've dilly-dallied and you've made us wait so long. We could have gone back and forth several times in all this time. But anyway, then their father Israel said to them, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the choice fruits of the land in your bags and carry them down as a present to the man. A little balm and a little honey, gum, resin, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take double the money with you. Carry back with you the money that was returned in the top of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take your brother also, and be on your way again to the man. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he may send back your other brother and Benjamin. Now this, and your other brother, seems to be a little gloss here to blend the two versions. One that recognizes Simeon was held in ransom, as it were, that they would come back, and then the other doesn't seem to recognize that one was left there. But anyway, bring other brother and Benjamin back. As for me, I am bereaved of my children. I am bereaved. So the men took the present, and they took double the money with them, as well as Benjamin. Then they went on their way down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. Now when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, bring the men into... Now Joseph saw Benjamin, and he talked to his own steward. Bring the men into the house, and slaughter an animal, and make ready for the men, so to dine with me at noon. And the man did as Joseph said, and brought the men to Joseph's house. Now he brings them to the house. Hadn't brought them in yet. To the house. Now the men were afraid, because they were brought to Joseph's house, and they said, it is because of the money replaced in our sacks the first time that we have been brought in. Now they're saying brought in, but they were just brought to, so that he may have an opportunity to fall upon us, to make us slaves, and take our donkeys. So they went up to the steward of Joseph's house and spoke to him at the entrance of the house. See, back outside. And they said, O my Lord, we came down the first time to buy food, and when we came to the lodging place, meaning the first day's journey, we opened our sacks, and there was each one's money in the top of the sack, and our money in full weight. Now, before we talked about what kind of money. At one point it said bundle of money, as if it was paper money and cash, and this says in full weight. And the commentary mentioned that this is in reference to this verse. This is a time before the minting of coins, where each coin had stamped on it its value, so you counted out a number of coins, and that equaled the value, or you gave paper money or something. But anyway, this was when the currency was metal, a valuable metal of some kind, but it wasn't stamped in uniform coins. So you would have a kind of mass of some kind of metal, and you would put it on a scale to weigh it. And so the weight of it gave you the value. So our money in full weight, meaning it was all there. So we have brought it back with us. Moreover, we have brought down with us additional money to buy more food. We do not know who put our money into our sacks. And he replied, this is steward replied, rest assured, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father must have put the treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money. Meaning, you paid me, or I got the money. That money, I don't know where it came from. It must have been God, is kind of the dialogue there. And then the next sentence is, Then he brought Simeon out to them, which is still implying they're outside. And when the steward had brought the men into Joseph's house, so now they're outside, now they're invited in, and given them water, and they had washed their feet, and when he had given their donkeys fodder, they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they had heard that they would dine there. So I guess make the present ready, that's kind of confusing, whether they're laying out all these gifts so that Joseph can see them when they're coming in, or they've gotten them out of their bags and they're in a way that they can hand them to him when he comes in. Anyway, when Joseph came home, they brought him the present that they had carried into the house and bowed to the ground before him. And he doesn't seem to acknowledge this present or talk about it or anything else. It just says they presented it to him, and then immediately he inquired about their welfare and said, "Is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive?" And they said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads and did obeisance. And then he looked up and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son." And with that, Joseph hurried out, because he was overcome with affection for his brother, and he was about to weep. So he went into a private room, and he wept there. And then he washed his face and came out, and controlling himself, he said, "Serve the meal." And they served him by himself, and the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who were there, who ate with him, but they were off by themselves. So it's like 3 tables, one for Joseph, one for his Hebrew brothers, and a separate table for the Egyptians. And the explanation is because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And when they were seated before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth, the men looked at one another in amazement. So in other words, he kind of had them seated in order of birth, by their birth order. And then when that was going on, they looked at each other in amazement, kind of thinking, what in the world's going on here? And then portions were taken to them from Joseph's table. But Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him. So, that's the whole chapter, 43. And a lot of interesting things are going on in there. But just to kind of review this storyline and where we are, in the Anchor commentary, he gives kind of a synopsis of the divergent paths, and it would also be a review of the whole story to refresh our memories. He says, as the story of Joseph progresses, the 2 parallel strands of which it is composed stand out more and more sharply by reason of their sustained and increasing differences in detail. According to the Elohist version so far, Joseph won a reprieve thanks to Reuben, only to be kidnapped by the Midianites, and this was when, they were going to kill him, who sold him as a slave to an Egyptian official named Potiphar. Eventually, fate turns the tables on the brothers by placing them at Joseph's mercy. They fail to recognize him, having no reason to think that he's still alive, let alone that he has become the all-powerful regent of mighty Egypt. But there are no such obstacles to Joseph's immediate recognition of the brothers. He charges them with spying against Egypt, demands that they prove their innocence by producing Benjamin, and he retains Simeon as hostage. Upon their return home, the brothers are further upset by the discovery of the money that Joseph had ordered to be put in their grain bags. Now here it is, in this version, they don't notice the money until they get all the way back home. Reuben personally vouches to their father for Benjamin's safe return from the unavoidable second trip to Egypt. The father is consistently referred to as Jacob in this version. In the Yahwist account, on the other hand, it is Judah, and that's the one we just read in this chapter, who prevails on his brothers to stop short of the fratricide and instead dispose of Joseph to the Ishmaelites, who sell him in turn to a high-ranking, unnamed Egyptian official. The official's faithless wife delays, but cannot cut off Joseph's ultimate rise to great power. Eventually, there is a similar encounter in Egypt between the brothers and Joseph, but nothing is said apparently about Simeon's detention as hostage. The brothers discover the planted money at the night encampment after the first day's journey. Long before their return home, their anxious father is identified in this version called Israel when we're reading through. Now, on the strength of these criteria, among others, the present narrative proves to be the work of the Yahwist. The brother's spokesman is not Reuben but Judah, and it is he who gives Israel his personal guarantee of Benjamin's return, with significant differences in language and specific detail. The replaced money has been discovered at the night encampment, and the term for bag is invariably a word amtahat, amtahat, and not sack, or sack, S-A-Q, as an E. The only two brief fragments which refer to Simeon appear to belie this uniformity, but these are precisely the kind of exceptions that point up the rule and thus stand out as intrusive glosses, as does the El Shaddai of verse 14. In other words, the redactor has smoothed it over and kind of stuck them in there. Anyway, closer scrutiny, moreover, will reveal other characteristics that we've learned to associate with the Yahwist. In dealing with his father, Judah does not hesitate to speak up forcefully and even accuse Israel of his dangerous indecision, where he says, "You've dilly-dallied for all that we could have gone and been back and gone again." Anyway, he reproaches his dad. A phrase or two at the proper time and place adds dimension to the portrayals of the steward, whose use of the Elohim, moreover, is natural to the Egyptians, a god, meaning your God put the money there or blessed you. And incidentally, the domestic is simply called the man, and the term in the J applied to another trusted servant, Rebecca, in another version or another place where we think they were the source of that version. Anyway, the ability to maintain suspense is both common to both of those. But anyway, that's some of the little separate details that we come up against. Now, what are we to think of all this? Where am I? Oh, here I am. I'm going the wrong direction. Okay. Well, Professor Vaughter in his commentary reminds us that Genesis 43 begins the Yahwist version, as we're just noticing the differences, and doesn't seem to be aware of Simeon. And they are supposed to return with Benjamin the next time they come, which we presume they're expecting that this famine has just begun and hadn't gone too long when they're in need, and there's going to be 7 years of famine, so he fully expects them to have to return and really doesn't need to take a hostage to get them to return, but he wants them to bring Benjamin back. And now Judah actually seems to chastise his father for the dilly-dallying, and seems to be angry with him. And this seems to convey some impatience when it mentions, "and our children." Now, again, the commentators didn't say this, but I would could read into it the possibility we've got Joseph and Benjamin, these special children of Rachel that are preferred over the others. And here Jacob is putting the whole clan in jeopardy because he's showing favoritism to Benjamin and not willing to risk losing him, but in the consequence of that is risking the survival of all of them. And not only the brothers, but now their families, their spouses, their children, because the head of the tribe won't relent and fulfill the demand of Joseph, the Egyptian, saying, "Send your brother back, so I will know that you are not spies and liars." So, anyway, we get a little bit of that tension reemerging. Anyway, there is this other discrepancy in the story, and it's reporting here how Judah says that the Egyptian, meaning Joseph to us, had asked them direct questions which brought forth the information about Benjamin. But earlier in the story, they were volunteering it because they're saying, no, we're not spies. We're all brothers, all have the same father. There were 12 of us, and one of them died, and the younger one's still at home. But us 10 here, we're all brothers. We're not spies, and we're just normal guys, and we're shepherds, and trust us. Don't arrest us. Don't kill us. But here, the story, they changed the story. They said he was asking them direct questions, and since it was a direct question, they answered and replied. So it's kind of his fault that we spilled the beans about Benjamin. But anyway, then once Israel relents and concedes that Benjamin must go, but at great risk still, but for the sake of the whole clan, he shows his shrewdness, his political savvy that he was kind of learning in the tent with Rebekah, his mom, in the early days, and then learned as he had to deal with Laban, his father-in-law, just how do you negotiate difficult situations. And so he says, take these gifts. Take these gifts. And so they list the gifts, and there's a lot of gifts, different things, but then in the narrative, it kind of moves that it's one gift, or it's one big package gift, but it's many things that they're sending. But it doesn't really give a motive for the gifts. And it may be simply to present yourselves as people of good breeding and good manners. If you're invited to a dinner party, well, do you take a gift to the host? But anyway, it could be also a bribe, where you have these resources to bribe lesser officials if you need to in order to get passage into the head guy. Or it could be simply a show of appreciation and thankfulness to the head guy for his graciousness before. That might be a motive. Or it could be a show of status. We are socially worthy people. We are successful people with resources. It's just we are suffering hard times because of the famine like others. In other words, we are not lowly beggars with nothing to reciprocate. We are worth saving. We're not folks who can be discarded and overlooked. So any one of those kind of things might have been in the motivation, but the text doesn't give it to us. So it's up for us to decide. Which do you like best? Number 1, number 2, number 3. Anyway, I think it's, and again, it may be part of the narrator trying to tell us those things about the patriarch. He does have savvy. he does have breeding. He does have good manners. This is an example of that. Make note. So that may be where it's coming from. Anyway, Vaughter states that the gifts named are the land's best products, things that are much in demand in Egypt, but really not terribly helpful to sustain life for the everyday calorie necessity of staying alive. The balm and the honey and the gum and the resin come from the trees, and the fruits that may still be available from the abundant years, but yet it's not enough to sustain them. And then, if it's all wrapped up into one package, it may not be that much anyway. But anyway, just as a token gift. Anyway, the extra money does have a purpose to show good faith, just in case it was a mistake and that the money got back into their sacks of grain, then show good faith by taking it back. Jacob is exercising these skills that, as I said, he had learned in his prior experiences in his home with Rebekah and then with Laban. However, it says he was in despair, meaning, I think, he's fearing the worst. He's gives in, but he's really fearing the worst. And so, if I am to suffer bereavement, I shall suffer it. So he's just kind of believing it's going to be terrible. And he tends to act and think that way. It's within his character to think and feel and be afraid of the worst. Vaughter notes that the brothers with Benjamin set off on their journey down to Egypt. It says they set off. The next sentence is they got there. There's no story about the journey and what happened along the way and so forth. And in that next sentence it says, Joseph sees them coming and notices that Benjamin is with them. Now this Yahweh storyteller is working this drama very well, and Joseph is prolonging their anxiety and creating this emotional up and down situation with the brothers. So they're invited into the very house of the highest official of the land, second to Pharaoh. And the question is, who are these rough, travel-worn shepherds to deserve such a gracious welcome and treatment? This is kind of the source of their fear and anxiety. Who are we? This is not normal. Something's going on here. And also their knowledge and experience of the world, that such socially distant encounters with such superpowers with such lowly folks usually means the superpower is victimizing and oppressing the lowly ones in some way to take some advantage and exploit them. So they are quite anxious. Now, we could suppose that their fears were that this would lead to some kind of kangaroo court proceedings, these money back in the bags, and that this was just a trap, and they were going to be brought before him and yelled at and said, you stole this money, and now you're back, we've caught you, and now we're going to send you to prison or make you slaves. So anyway, that is kind of the dynamic that we would imagine and suppose might be going on. But then Vaughter suggests that the brothers really have no idea how powerful Joseph really is in that position, and that he doesn't really have to play games like that. If he wanted to call them spies, they could just have them executed right on the spot. If he wanted to enslave them, he could just say, take them to the galleys, or, just snap of his fingers. That's all it takes. He didn't have to play the game. But he's speculating that Joseph's servant, the steward, was probably quite amused that these brothers were trying to explain away their guilt. Now, we don't know if Joseph had brought the steward in on the situation and the reality so that he would better understand the game that Joseph is playing, so the steward could play his role to help it happen. So maybe Joseph confided in the steward and he really understood what was going on. But we're not told that. The narrator shows some irony here in telling the story. When the steward tells them that he had received the payment on their last trip, which is indicating he may have been the one dealing directly with them and not necessarily Joseph, but it raised the question of who put the money in the sack and when. Was it the steward or some other servant that was ordered to do that? But given the way this is rolling out, it was probably the steward who was orchestrating most of these kinds of things going on. But the irony I mentioned was the comparison of the brothers' statement when they find the money. From the last chapter in verse 28, what is this that God has done to us? And they're afraid. What is this that God has done to us to have this money back in their sacks? In contrast with the steward who says to them, be at ease. You have no need to fear. Your God and the God of your father must have put the treasures in your bags for you. Didn't do something to you, but for you as a blessing. Because I received the payment, and if you got the money, it must have been God. So anyway, this contrast between here this Egyptian is exercising a statement of faith in God's generosity. Here the brothers are afraid of God and thinking God is a trickster who's trying to do them harm. Interesting contrast there that we probably wouldn't notice because there are too many verses separated between them. But when you're hearing the story over and over and over again, then you start making connections. Anyway, as we remember the accounts with the different details, in the Alois version, they find the money the first night at the encampment, which reminds us of another thing, that there may have been two sets of sacks. They filled grain sacks and they put them on the donkeys, and they were to go all the way back. But in the earlier story it said that Joseph said, provide them with provisions for the journey. So there may have been other provisions for the journey and additional sacks, and it may have been in those sacks that they found the money, because they opened those sacks on the first night to get provisions for the journey. But then other versions are saying money in the grain sacks. So again, indications of two different storylines that are woven together. It raises a question, though, with the finding the sacks on the first night of the encampment. Why didn't they just go back? It was only one day's journey. Or why didn't they gather up the money and give one or two of the brothers to quickly go back? I mean, they could go back quicker than hauling all the donkeys and stuff, and go back and get it straightened out then. Well, that made me think of a real-life situation maybe all of us have experienced. You've gone to a store, you purchase something, you get the change back. You're at the cash register, you notice they gave you too much change. Oops, you made a mistake. You gave me too much. Easy to do. Most of us, honest, good people, want to be fair. However, you make the purchase, your mind's on different things, you're not sure, didn't seem quite right, but, too much is going on. You get back to the car, you're still thinking about it, or even get all the way home, and you look at the ticket, and you look at the change, and oh my gosh, they did give me too much. What do? Do you get out of the car if you're in the car, or if you're all the way home, and you go all the way back to the store? And if it's at one of the big stores like Walmart or something, there's all these lines and crowds, and and all of that. Are you going to go do that for 50 cents or $1 or $5 what do you do? What do you think? Yeah, sometimes you just make things worse. They say it's too much trouble. It costs us too much time and effort that they'll be charging the company time to go fix it than that money's worth. So that's one way of dealing with it, because you realize it's a hassle. Of course, you could realize, because sometimes when you wonder if things are right, you get to the car and you realize, or home, well, damn their hides, they shortchanged me. Yeah. And you can't fix that either. And so maybe you can just think, well, it all balances out in the great scheme of things. They've shortchanged me sometimes. This is just kind of, thank you, God, you made up for that. I can't remember where it was. Or one of the things you can think, well, the next time you go, you'll straighten it out. And I've got one where we went to dinner and I ordered a cup of water, and then when I looked at the bill, I was thinking, this was too much. That seems like too much. And sure enough, they'd charged me for, the $2 for the pop that I didn't get. So I was going to hold on to that ticket and take it back sometime and say, you owe me a pop, because I ordered water and you gave that to me. But too much time has gone. I can't remember where the ticket is and where the place was. So anyway, but those things happen in our real life where, and what do we do about it? Well, anyway, in the Yahweh strain, he has them find the money when they open the grain sacks at their arrival back home. And so it's too much trouble to go all the way back and fix it. But now that they're going back, they're thinking about it. Now, and this interchange ends with the steward retrieving Simeon from his captivity, and he's reunited, restored to his brothers, but they're outside. And then immediately he invites them inside. And anyway, as I suggested, this was a redactional insertion, meaning the redactor was trying to smooth things out between the two stories. But it seems a little awkward that the steward leaves them outside, goes inside, finds Simeon, and he probably is not present anywhere close because we don't think Joseph has told him what's what. And so he has to kind of keep him isolated somewhere, keeping him comfortable, we would suppose. But take a while, go get him, bring him outside. Here's your brother, now come back in. The logistics don't seem to make a whole lot of sense there, which adds to the point of this was probably a redaction that was inserted, and then that's part of the awkwardness of the logistics. Anyway, now, since they, at this point, are feeling nothing bad is going to happen and that they will be having this noon meal, because I imagine they're smelling things, the house is being filled with the good smells of the meal, that they followed the customs, they washed their feet and got cleaned up for the meal. They also decided, again, we're not sure, get the present ready, if it meant get it out of their bags and dress it up in a nice package, or if it's lay it out so that he could see it when he comes in. Anyway, but they're preparing the present, it tells us. And the story gives the impression that Joseph was away at work, and here's another kind of thing, because he sees them coming, he recognized Benjamin's there, and he instructs the steward to prepare the meal. It gives the impression he's at home. But when the mealtime comes, Joseph comes home. So was it early morning and he was getting ready to go to work? He sees them coming, gives the instructions, and then he goes off to the palace or government building to do his job. And then he comes home for lunch. Well, makes sense, but I don't know if their world and social customs were quite that way. But anyway, these logistics are, when you try to map it out in your head, it gets confusing sometimes. Anyway, when he comes home, he enters into his brother's presence, and he receives the present and exchanges these pleasantries and inquires about their father. And then he asks about Benjamin, and he looks deeply into his face. And Vaughter suggests that Joseph would not only recognize Benjamin as the little brother who's grown up to a degree, but he would be recognizing in his face the characteristics from his mother and his father, and he's overcome. So many deep emotions and feelings and thoughts and memories, and so he has to run away. Has a good cry, gets it out, washes his face, and he comes back, says, continue the feast. Now, the very end says they drank freely. Now, there are different interpretations of that. Drank freely could mean got drunk or got tipsy or let their guard down, because if you're afraid something bad's going to happen, you're going to pretend like you're drinking. You're going to stay clear-headed, because if something bad's happened, we got to bolt for the door and get the heck out of here, or keep our wits about us. But they seem to have let their guard down. They felt safe. They weren't afraid. And so they just enjoyed themselves. The Anchor commentary states that literally, if it's translated, it says, and they drank and became drunk with him. Now, the point about that is not that they had a wild party and they were going crazy and carousing and all of that. He suggests that this was to create a contrast between their carefree moment at the feast, to compare it with what's coming next, when all this heavy drama is going to happen of, they go away, the cup's in the bag, they're brought back, you thieves, and then, anyway, that big drama after the carefree happy time, then they're all scared and threatened again. So, but anyway, there were all these other issues with the seating arrangements. Joseph, in one sense, was eating separately, but when he was in Potiphar's house, he was in charge of everything except the food, because they ate separately. And everybody knew Joseph was a Hebrew, even though he had pretty well assimilated into Egyptian culture, but he may still be eating separately from the other Egyptians because of that. His brothers wouldn't know that. They could have assumed that he was eating separately because of his high status. None of the servants were of equal level with him to sit at table with him. So that may be a reason there, and a logical conclusion possibly. But it does make the statements that Egyptians felt that it was an abomination to eat with Hebrews. And so it's reiterated again in this text. But an interesting thing that's happening here, the statement of the seating from the eldest to the youngest, was kind of bizarre. And there's an unspoken question. How does Joseph know our birth order? It's one more strange thing that just doesn't add up. And at the time, there's probably so much going on, it's just too much to process. But anyway, that's another little thing that's in there it doesn't go anywhere. It just says they sat in that order and they were amazed by it, and then that's the end of it. Professor Vaughter points out that the taboos of the eating across culturally is and interreligiously not only apply to what table where one would sit and with whom one would sit, but also certain dishes and and part of the diet kinds of things were forbidden differently among cultures. But he also pointed out that people would carry their own eating utensils. They didn't have the eating utensils laid out on the table. And part of the custom or reason for that was because of this cross-cultural issue of taboo foods, that even though this fork is going to eat this acceptable food and this knife is going to cut it, we wouldn't know if these utensils had been used before on some forbidden food and therefore are unholy or contaminated. It's kind of like you don't chop your lettuce for the salad with the knife you've just cut up the raw chicken. Now, we don't think it was a dietary issue for cleanliness, but they may have been onto something. Maybe one of God's revelations that this will make you sick, but you don't understand it, so I'll just tell you it's forbidden. But anyway, so they may have all had their own utensils on them and they could eat. But it makes me wonder who was preparing the different dishes, and how would that Egyptian really know how to prepare appropriate food for the Hebrew guests? Now, Joseph could have instructed them, and his food would have been the same as their food, since it said it was taken from his table, but it didn't say what was on the Egyptian's table. But then the Hebrew brothers didn't know Joseph was a Hebrew and that his food from his table would be kosher to them. So they're in an awkward position. Do you eat this and break your rules, or do you risk being a bad guest in refusing to eat that? I remember we were invited out to eat at one of our elderly members when I was doing my internship out in Montana, and she had made the rolls with weevil-filled flour. What do you do? What did I do? I can't remember. That's too long ago. So, do like my little brother did and put it in his mouth and then put the napkin to his mouth and spit it back out and put it what quickly. I don't know. Anyway, our time is up, and I have we'll deal with this dietary stuff next time for a while, and then move on to more of the intrigue. So let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for all the ways that you do bless us and work your way into our lives with unusual circumstances that catch us off guard and make us wonder what in the world is going on here, and where are you present here, and how are we supposed to be faithfully responding to the situations in our lives. And we know that you love us and care for us and try to help us make those right decisions. In Christ's name, amen.